Good morning and welcome. I'd like to introduce you to our son, Cormac Brissett. Cormac is a special education teacher at the Crossroads Elementary School in St. Paul. Cormac, how diverse is Crossroads Elementary?
Thank you. Crossroads is located in the Rondo neighborhood of St. Paul, adjacent to Frog Town. Rondo was traditionally the middle class African American neighborhood in St. Paul before 94 cut through it. And consequently, Crossroads reflects the diversity of the neighborhood, and because it also has open enrollment, it also reflects the diversity of the entire district. Our student body is roughly 20% African American, 20% Somali, 15 to 20% Karen and Hmong, and the rest a mixture of native Hispanic students from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico, and a handful of white learners.
And who are the Karins?
So the Karen are our newest Minnesotans. The Karen were our refugee group from Burma that escaped when the Myanmar central government started to commit atrocities against them. They moved into the refugee camps in northern Thailand that the Hmong had lived in, and then have been slowly coming to St. Paul.
Is Crossroads the most diverse school in the district?
It's one of the most diverse schools because St. Paul Public Schools offers open enrollment, and because Crossroads is a year-round school. The types of parents who choose to send their children to Crossroads are diverse. There's the added factor that Crossroads is half science, STEM, and half Montessori. So it is unique in a number of ways, and as a consequence, the diversity is much more a reflection. If it was just serving the area, the zip code it was located in, it would be 50% Hmong and 50% African American. But because it serves a wider range of families, it is considerably more diverse than other elementary schools in the district.
How are the things like behavior and interventions and curriculum and content informed by this racial inequity?
Sure. So there are, you asked three different questions really, and there are three different approaches. The first one, and the most significant one as far as I'm concerned, is where behavior is informed by the district's and the school's policy about equity. As you your viewers are probably aware, St. Paul Public Schools had there was a lot of controversy about the numbers of African American students being suspended at a much higher rate than their peers. One of the ways that Crossroads is uniquely equipped to deal with achieving a degree of equity in terms of behavior interventions is by being a crisis-informed campus. That means we have a budget for additional behavior support staff, as well as social workers from the Wilder Foundation, who are located right on campus with offices in the school. The district in general, Crossroads specifically, and those of us who work within communities in crisis or trauma, recognize that behavior is always a symptom of an underlying causal factor. So our role as educators is to do what we can to address those underlying causal factors. An interesting note when I was doing graduate work for my English language learning license and was researching generational trauma among refugee students, the data came from African American students living in high poverty communities in Chicago and Los Angeles. That is, the trauma that a child growing up in poverty and violence is going to experience is so acute as to be comparable to a kid whose family has experienced atrocities and had to flee their country. Now, the extent to which curriculum is informed by the diversity is a challenge for any teacher, I think, in the United States, because let's look at reading materials. Not only do we have to select reading material that reflects the proficiency of the reader, meets the state and federal standards, but also, if it is a fiction text especially, employs characters that are relatable to this broad swath of learners. And really the solution is to dig hard and then sometimes have to create your own content to reflect the diversity of the classroom. When I'm creating story problems, it's much easier than if I'm teaching a math identifying order of operations in a story problem. It's much easier for me to write a story problem and use the names that are consistent, like a Karen name, a Hmong name, a Somali name, than it is to write an entire story that reflects the experience and ethnicity and perhaps cultural traditions of the students who are reading them. So this is a huge challenge, and it's one that has certainly not been vaulted.
So how do you measure progress in all of this?
So when we're looking at, let's just say, for example, reading proficiency, there are the state standardized tests, which are, and the federal standardized tests, which are not necessarily helpful, because inevitably students who are English language learners, students who have moved a lot, students who are living within communities of poverty and sometimes violence are going to inevitably score lower on the sorts of standardized tests that the state and the federal government use to determine lots of things. The allocation of resources is a big one, but also the relative success of the school. My assessments are largely informal, summative assessments. That is, if I am introducing a set of vocabulary words to a learner, the learner can themselves graph how much progress they're making with those words. My priority for my students is for them to see that they have a role and a degree of agency in their progress. And then my experience, while it's been somewhat limited, is that that progress is manifested in some of the data. For example, FAST. The FAST tests are given to each student twice a year within Crossroads. And this shows progress on a very academic progress on an extremely precise level from kindergarten through 5th grade. So we can look at this data and say, spring of 4th grade, this student was reading at a winter of 1st grade level. Yeah. We can go back to that data and say, well, look at this progress made. So it's not progress measured against the average student in the United States or even the average student in the district. It's progress measured against the performance of the individual student.
Okay. I'm curious about how your own personal and professional life have been impacted by dealing with this situation that you're in.
Yeah, it has, and it has considerably. I felt that when I came to St. Paul Public Schools that I had the tools to deal with, or I was equipped and skilled enough to negotiate some of the tensions that are embodied in a radically diverse learning environment. I had taught in Thailand, I had taught in the Philippines. What I did not precisely understand was what my limitations were. And the fact that I didn't have a degree of native credibility in terms of relating to these learners. And relating is the most operative word. All children, in my experience, are relational, but children in crisis, children in radical poverty, and children who have experienced systemic racism are more acutely relational than their peers who are non-minority, not in communities of violence and poverty. So, my approach has been, my job is, of course, to learn from my colleagues who have had more experience, are professionals of color, and have been within this community, working within this community for a long time. And the second is to learn from the learners. What are the social cues and expectations and norms that are different than what my personal experiences are? The question I ask myself on my way to school or when I park is, I ask for lips to speak that which is skillful, ears to hear what is helpful, eyes to see what is lovable in these friends, and a heart to feel love for them. If I have learned one thing, it is the extent to which I am deficient, and I have there's a vast amount of growth necessary for me to continue to work to meet these learners' needs. In the meantime, I fall back to relationships. Children, when they know that they are safe, when they know they are loved and acknowledged for who they are more likely to do their best work. If they can't, for some reason, do that, it's the instructor's job to address those factors that are inhibiting it. And the only way one is going to be able to do that is by having a trusting, loving relationship with the learner. So in a nutshell, I would say relationships and the relational dynamics of me being a white, cisgendered male teacher in a school in which I am the minority. Am I prepared to relate openly and honestly with a degree of humility with these learners? And am I prepared to learn from them?
We support Cormac any way we can. And it's changed now with the virus, of course. But there are certain things that I'm sure that we'll be able to do through the next period of time. And if you're at all curious about how you might get involved, 5654 star 5654. You can call and I'll pass that information on to Cormac, or maybe even have him call you and help you figure out what you can do to aid him in his process. And I think he's doing a wonderful job, and I'm sure you agree. Thank you for listening.